But when the job became work and I was spending 16 hours a day helping wealthy people make more money, I was like, this isn't what I want to do. And so the episode of The Office that comes up is, it's actually the UK version, the Ricky Gervais version, the original. There was a character on the show that said, I'd rather be at the bottom of a ladder I want to climb than halfway when up I don't. And I was halfway up a ladder I never wanted to climb. And at that point, I made a decision and I started thinking about my life and what I wanted to spend my time doing and what fulfilled me. And I said, I want to do what actually fills my heart.
Welcome to the Superintendent's Hangout, where we discuss topics in education, charter schools, life in general, and not necessarily in that order. I'm your host, Dr. Sciarretta. Come on in and hang out. In this episode, I sat down with Eric Cross. Eric is a longtime middle school science teacher, innovator, consultant, presenter, an all-around cool guy. Eric shares his transformational and inspiring journey, the challenges he's faced in his life, and how those inform his teaching practices, and much, much more. I had a great time sitting down with Eric, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome, Eric. Thanks for coming and hanging out for us on a little bit with us on the Superintendent's Hangout.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
I thought we could start with your origin story, where you come from, what your path has been, what leads you to this moment, and what informs your vision, your view of the world, and your work in the world.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I was born and raised here in San Diego to a 19-year-old mother, and she loved me to death, but we didn't have a lot of money growing up. And so she worked multiple jobs so she can take care of me. She always tells me stories about when I was a baby, she would come home at 3:00 in the morning from her job at, we used to live in Hillcrest, and there's a place, Great Maple, but it used to be a place called Topsy's back in the day. And we lived right across the street. She would waitress there, and she would come home and wake me up just so she can see me before she had to go to her next job. And when I was growing up, I was told that my dad had died in a plane crash. And so it was just her and I for a long time.
Your mom told you that?
Yeah. So, maybe a little bit about my background. Yeah. So growing up, my mom's white, blonde hair, blue eyes. My dad's black, African-American. And so I was, biracial during a time before it was as commonplace as it was. And so she would get stares when she pushed me around and, in stroller and things like that. So, grew up, and when you're a young boy and you don't have your dad or a father figure in your life, you kind of try on different personalities or behaviors that other men that you see in life, kind of emulate them.
Yeah.
And I found myself doing that, but didn't realize it until I was older and looking back. And a lot of those people that I would copy were teachers of mine. Sometimes they weren't teachers. Sometimes they were just guys I thought were cool, whether they were on TV or whether they were in the neighborhood. But it was teachers who were these big mentors of mine, and they didn't know it at the time. So I had some pretty great people that cared about me that didn't have to. And I always say that I'm a product of that, of people who cared about me that didn't have to. Mm. And so that led me into eventually becoming a teacher. And if you want to know more about that part of the story,
I'd love to hear more.
I could talk more about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So there are three main people that kind of come to mind. The first one is a man named Park Trefs. Park Trefs was a UCSD professor who came down to where we lived in Skyline area of San Diego. I went to Keeler Middle School and Morse High School. And that was an area that was back then, 90s, gangs, drugs. We were lucky I had a great principal who, which is strange now, is like a colleague, and I've talked to him now as a teacher, Wendell Bass. I was fortunate to have rock star principals and teachers, and I didn't know it until I became a teacher what I had, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. He would come down from UC San Diego and bring his college level science activities to us. We worked on sea urchins. He gave us syringes. This was back when they're checking your backpacks for like drugs and knives. The last thing they're doing is giving us sharp objects. And because of him, I entered the science fair. And in my family, there was no legacy of academics. No one ever owned a home. My mom didn't graduate high school, and so this was a big deal for us. And so I did science fair in 7th grade and won the San Diego Science Fair in Balboa Park. And that kind of gave me a lot of confidence going to high school. And then in high school is where I met another person who was a big influence. His name was Mr. Clunn, Carlton Clunn, and he was my aviation instructor. So Morse High School, which the principal was Dr. Shirley Peterson. So I went from Wendell Bass to Shirley Peterson, which was...
I know Shirley.
I figured you would.
Yeah, we were in the same doctoral program together.
Yeah, these people I didn't know as a kid were people who were like pillars in the education community. Yeah. And it's one of those things that I wasn't appreciative until looking back when people like yourself tell me this. And I realized that these are folks who've poured into thousands and thousands of kids and changed lives. Yeah. So she was the principal there. And because a fun fact is I learned how to fly before I learned how to drive. So I started flying at 15. And because Morse had a program for flying. So when you see those like little planes flying around San Diego, like there could be like a 15-year-old kid in there flying. Wow. And
you have a pilot's license?
No, so what they let you do is they let you fly with an instructor and you could solo once because of their insurance.
Right.
So the way the flight instructor, Mr. Clunn, let you solo is once you show that you had the maturity and like the proficiency and all that kind of stuff, you'd we're at Gillespie Field. And once he thought you were ready, he'd fly you around a couple times. You'd do touch and goes, which is when you land the plane and take off again. And then he would just get out and he'd go, all right, go do 3 touch and goes and come back. Like talk about stress. Like during, like it was the most stressful thing ever. And even in retrospect, I can't believe they let a 15-year-old, 16-year-old do this, but I did it and survived. And I think the most proud moment is Morse was a popular school in San Diego. Everyone respected the football team and things like that. But if you soloed, you got the best varsity letter. It was the M with a tiger paw with wings coming off the side. And it was right in the center. And that's something I still have in my closet. And that was something that was a big moment in my life. But after high school, things took a turn. My home was not healthy. Like I tell people that I understand dysfunction well because I grew up a lot in it, and we grew up in a hand to mouth. We didn't have a lot of money, and made some choices in retrospect. Like is my mom and her husband at the time that in retrospect looking back are like, wow, like I can't believe like we made those decisions, but we did them out of survival. And the home life that I had because of my stepfather, he was very abusive, alcohol, physically abusive. I decided it was better to leave home than to stay there. And so on Thanksgiving, actually, the year I graduated, I left home and I lived on the street. And I decided that it would be better to do that than to stay where I was.
So you're like 17, 18.
Yeah, around that time. And I had a job. I was working at Boomers, the mini golf place.
Oh,
it used to be called the Family Fun Center back in the day. Yeah. So I worked there. And that was a sweet job when you were in high school because you could hook all your friends up with I don't know if the statute of limitations have passed since I worked there back in the day, but like tokens, wristbands.
Wage theft or
yeah, all that. I think they've changed owners multiple times. I apologize. That was an old me that I'm much more ethical and on the up and up now. But back then, the go-karts, that was a spot. But it was minimum wage. And so I would make enough money every 2 weeks. And I look forward to being able to stay in a motel where I can shower and things like that.
So you were living on the street?
Yeah. So I had a Jeep. So I actually lived in my Jeep.
Yeah.
And I would park in different places in Lemon Grove or different areas where I thought it would be safe, where I wouldn't be bothered. And the car wasn't that big and I'm 6'4". So it was a very uncomfortable situation. And when you're going through that at 18, you start asking all kinds of questions and going through depression. And I was the kid who was in like a lot of the high level classes, but I didn't get high level grades. Mm-hmm. I took that test as a teacher. I understand what it is, the Raven test.
Yes.
And I didn't know what it was back in the day. It had a bunch of shapes and you were supposed to predict the next shape. I didn't know what gifted and gate was.
Right.
But I was in that kind of cluster class, and it's amazing how much you don't know and your family doesn't know about what these kind of organizational and educational programs mean. But then when I became a teacher, now I understand. So I did that, and that kind of set me on a trajectory to be in what Morse had was called seminar. And so seminar was like this.
Yeah, because you got like between 97 and 99, like, or you had to, there was like GATE, and then GATE seminar was the top of the top, right?
And I knew none of this.
Right.
And let me, like, full disclosure, I'm not crushing my grades at this point in time. Like, I'm barely making it in my classes. And it's, home life's a mess. Like, I'm doing whatever I can to kind of survive. But I think because I was maybe a divergent thinker, or I was able to like solve puzzles, I don't know what it was. But I would be in this class and we're studying like neoclassicism, and we're studying art history, and we're discussing philosophical conversations. And I'm in there with the salutatorian and the valedictorian and people going to like Stanford. And I couldn't even write a great essay. They would give me my essays back and there were red marks all over it. But I was like, I'm just happy to be here. So when I left home, all my friends were in good colleges. And I felt a lot of shame because they were all doing really well. Matter of fact, I visited them and I would use their showers because I didn't have a place to clean up. And when you're an 18-year-old graduating high school, like, what college you're going to is the biggest deal. And so that was a really, really rough time in my life at that point. And the turning point was an aunt, my mom's sister, finding out, because no one knew. None of my family. We were good at like the nuclear families didn't like share each other's business. And when my aunt found out, she said, you're going to come stay with us. And she had one of those functional homes, you know, the ones that like eat dinner together and take family photos every Christmas and send them to people. That was all weird to me.
The family photo Christmas card.
Yeah. Like, all that was weird to me. I don't think, who does this?
And matching sweaters.
Yeah, we didn't have matching sweaters, but we did go like to Walmart. They had like year passes to the zoo. They talked about their feelings. Like, these are things that now are normal for me. But back then, we didn't do that. You know, everything was passive aggressive, avoidance, all these kinds of things. And so she said, you're either going to, you know, get a job where you can stay on your feet, or you're going to go to college. And so I went to school. And so I went to the community colleges, and I couldn't afford the books. So I would stay at the libraries and I would use the textbooks there. I would go to Barnes & Noble in Mira Mesa, and I would take out the textbook and I would do my homework. And because I couldn't afford it, I would just put it back on the shelf and just walk back home. And that, I had to hustle to be able to get my education. And kind of fast forward doing that for a few years, I end up meeting probably the one of the biggest mentors of my life as an adult. His name was Sam Webster. And Sam played football with another mentor of mine named Darren Carrington, who played for the Chargers and played for Denver and for the Raiders. Now he's a pastor, you know, at a church. And Sam was like, he had all these things that like I never knew. He was, you know, owned a home in San Diego, owned a car, was successful in business, strong black man, like all of these things and these elements of like my identity that I never had a model for. He was those things. And he brought me in and he said, will you do gopher work for me? You start a finance company. And I said, what do you want me to do? And he's like, well, you can run to Arby's and you can change all the fluorescent lights in the ceiling and like, you know, help us out, get set up. And I said, okay. Well, as the company grew, I grew in that company, and that I had no intention of going into finance, but he mentored me to the place where I was able to help grow the company and then become self-employed myself. And because of those three people, like those are the three people I think that kind of really stand out. There's a lot along the way, but those are the three people that really defined who I am today. And I worked in finance for about 10 years before becoming a teacher. And a lot of those experiences shaped the kind of teacher that I am today and why I value what I do.
So I have a lot of questions about where we can go from.
Sorry, no, that was
great.
A lot.
It's great. I hear the crumpling of all my questions from before. No, but before we get there, so at that point, you still don't have contact with your dad.
No, I don't. And the way, so for a long time, I believed that he was dead. And then one day, so my mom ended up leaving my stepfather after I left home. I was about 23 at the time. She ended up leaving him and took my sister, and they moved up to Rancho Bernardo. And I was on my own at that point. I had an apartment. I had, you know, I was making it. And she left, and they were kind of a mess. You know, she had just got a divorce. You know, they were kind of trying to figure out life. And there was this practice in many cultures where if the father dies or is gone, the responsibility for supporting the family fell on the oldest son. And I kind of internalized that. I think I had a family or a friend of mine that had shared that with me. And so I ended up moving back home. And so I moved, when I say home, I guess I moved in with my mom for a little bit. And I walked in one day and my mom said, and I remember this day clearly because I had just bought an LG flip phone from Verizon. And it was amazing because when you closed it, it had little LED lights.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was nice.
I think I wanted to have one of those.
I still have it, as a matter of fact. And it was one of the first phones that you could do group text. You could text message a bunch of people at once. So I remember sending a Christmas message to like 20 people, and they all sent me a message back because you didn't know it was a group text. So I was like, this is super efficient. This is my love for technology. But I walked in the house that day, and my mom said, I talked to your dad. And I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments where like your brain goes, you're on your own. Like I have no information for you on this. And so I walked into the bedroom and just acted like nothing happened. My body just went on autopilot. And what am I supposed to feel at this point? Like I've seen the movie Antoine Fisher. Yeah. I don't know if anybody's seen it before, but I don't want to spoil it. It's good to watch, but Antoine Fisher is a person who grew up without his parents. He ends up going to look for them. And that's all I'll say. But I've seen the movie. I don't know how things are going to go. So I go into work the next day, and Sam's my boss. And I walk in and I tell Sam, I said, hey, Sam. And Sam and I have been working together for years now. And he's been like a big brother, like a mentor to me. And I said, my mom said she talked to my dad. And Sam goes, you need to go into the next office and call him. And at that point, I was like, brother, I didn't tell you this so you can give me some action step. Like you're supposed to be my friend. You're supposed to like validate how I feel. Be like, oh man, I hear, it's tough. Don't go and tell me what to do. So he goes, go in the next room and call him. So I go in the next office, it's empty. And I get on Google and look up his name and I call him. And the phone rings and I'm praying it goes to voicemail. And it rings and rings and rings. I remember this distinctly. It was in October. And a sleepy voice answers the phone and it says, hello? And I'm like, dang it. And I said, Rick? That's my dad's name. And he goes, yeah. And I said, this is your son, Eric. Exactly, right? Like, what do you say to a person like that you haven't seen, you've never met? And he goes, oh, hi. And the conversation's a blur. But I remember getting off the phone and agreeing to talk again. And I remember him saying this. He says, do you know what today is? And I said, no. He says, today's my birthday. And all these feelings are way too intense at this point because the only thing that popped in my head was, that's cool. Like what am I supposed to have birthday? You missed all mine. So we get off the phone. We agree to talk later. I hang up the phone and I'm sitting there kind of like taking all this in. And I realized the last time that he saw me, he was the exact same age I am right now at that moment. So he was 23 when I was born. I'm 23 when he's calling me. And the weird thing with that is like, you get to that point where like you get to the age that you remember your parents being.
Oh, trust me.
Right?
And they seemed really old. And then I'm like, is that how people see me? Well, you and I are in different stages, but you'll get there soon.
But like my mom was 19 when she had me.
Yeah,
and
right.
So like I got to her age quick. I feel like at a younger age because she was young. And when I've got to certain ages or I reach certain ages in her life that I'm at now, I go, I thought she knew way more. Yeah. And I go, who are the adults here? Like I'm this age right now.
Yeah.
I know what I know, but okay. And it actually developed a lot more empathy for me when I realized what it's like to be there. And so we get off the phone and he tells me that, and I realize it's his birthday. And I essentially agreed to fly out. And I brought 2 friends with me because I didn't know what it was going to be. And
he's somewhere else in the country.
So he's in Jersey. And he worked at he was a television producer for Madison Square Garden. So he produced the Knicks games and the Rangers games. So what I ended up finding out is that my grandmother, who's the matriarch of that family, she raised 3 boys and 1 girl. And my dad and my uncles, and she's black, East Orange, Jersey, just outside Newark. Right, like you check off all the boxes for risk. She's there.
I've been to East Orange.
Exactly. Yeah. So you know how it is. Dad wasn't around. My grandfather was one of the first African-American force recon Marines. And so he served 3 tours in Vietnam. And so that honored and served, but that experience did a number on that brother. Like
indelible.
Yes. Yeah. It was a lot that he went through, and he wasn't able to be the greatest father to them. But my uncle, pediatric cardiologist in Pennsylvania, my dad, television producer, my other uncle, attorney, and my aunt worked for the Commission for Arts and Culture. So all of them.
Your grandma got it right.
She got it right. Grandma Minnie. She didn't mess around, and God rest her soul. She passed away a few years ago, but I got to have a relationship with her for a number of years before she had died. And so, those people in my life, and Sam especially, gave me what I wanted most, which is a relationship with my other half of my family. Wow. And it still goes on now. Wow. So yeah. And so that's kind of the backstory of the family.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that and for taking the risk. Do your students know that? Do your colleagues know? Do they know some of it? Should they know? I guess they're going to know after this podcast with my tens and tens of listeners. So
the word will spread. The students probably know better than colleagues. I think I am a big believer in the power of stories. And I think as I've grown as a man in as far as empathy in teaching, I'm going to credit teaching to this. Teaching has made me a much more empathetic and I would say healthier man because of my exposure to so many young people as far as like interacted in different relationships. So I share that story, and I've been doing it for the past probably 5 years. I share an annotated version of that story in the first day that I start teaching. Mm. And the reason why is I took a risk one day. And when I was telling an annotated version of that story for my students, I was able to watch their nonverbal reactions when I talked about growing up without a father, when I talked about growing up poor, when I talked about all these different things. And I think what that did is it made me from a two-dimensional teacher to like a 3D human for them. And it gave them, they understood my why behind why I do what I do. Yeah. So I share it openly with my students and with strangers, but there's probably a lot of people who don't know most of those things.
Full disclosure for listeners, Eric and I have known each other a long time professionally. And I think I knew little snippets and tidbits, but I appreciate you filling in some of those, the gaps there for my understanding of what's led you to this point in your life. So you're in the private sector by way of various mentors and who really helped you grow up, and then at a certain point you go into teaching. Yeah. So how does that happen?
I'm going to credit this to an episode of The Office and the 2008 financial crisis. So where's he going with this?
I'm a huge Office fan. So The Office, not a huge fan of financial crises, but
so I was in the industry, in the finance industry, real estate, private money, corporate, residential, all those different assets and or aspects of finance I was in, and Sam exposed me to it. My trajectory was to be on the secondary market or something like along Wall Street, like along going that direction. I was slowly being kind of groomed and trained to take on more and more. And the 2008 financial crisis happened, and the job became work. And it was never the kind of work that I dreamed of doing as a kid. I did it in full honesty because it was lucrative. I grew up poor, and the last thing that you want is to be poor. And so when you have an opportunity to make money and travel and do those things, I know some people say like do what fulfills you, but I get that in a certain vein, but there's also a level of privilege that you have to be able to do that, to get to a job, especially living in this city. So I was like, you know what, this is going to make money. It's going to make more money than any of my friends have. And I can go volunteer with kids, which is I was doing on the side. And I had best of both worlds. But when the job became work and I was spending 16 hours a day helping wealthy people make more money, I was like, this isn't what I want to do. And so the episode of The Office that comes up it's actually the UK version, the Ricky Gervais version, the original. There was a character on the show that said, I'd rather be at the bottom of a ladder I want to climb than halfway when I don't. And I was halfway up a ladder I never wanted to climb. And at that point, I made a decision and I started thinking about my life and what I wanted to spend my time doing and what fulfilled me. And I said, I want to do what actually fills my heart. And I Googled teaching credential programs, and I knew it was going to be between history and science. It was one of those two. That's where I was leaning. And I had just missed the cutoff to USD's program. So I was bummed, and I was like, oh, I got to wait like a half a year. And I started looking through the staff, and who was on there? Dr. Shirley Peterson. She was working there at some point in time. So I emailed her. And I said, Dr. Peterson, this is Eric Cross. I was in your high school like 12 years ago or something. I saw that you work for USD. I had just missed the cutoff. Do you know anybody? Is there any way I could still apply? Now, there's no reason why she should know me. I went to that school, thousands of people. And, I was just a shot in the dark. But I was working in the private sector, taking risks, asking for the business, all that stuff was already ingrained in me. So I was like, yeah, shoot your shot. What are you going to lose? She emails me back. She says, I remember you. I'm going to contact Miriam True, who used to work at USD, see if we can get you an interview. USD was able to scramble a few professors who were just about to go on vacation to do an interview for me, because they interviewed all their teachers before they got into the program, just so I could be interviewed to get in. And I got interviewed, and that started my journey of getting my credential. So those relationships that I had from high school that I didn't even realize I had, I was able to benefit from like years later as an adult. And that's what started me becoming a teacher. And then as you know, I started student teaching at Einstein.
Yeah. One of my a few of my previous podcast guests talk about, well, they call them various things, angels or serendipitous mentors in life, or people who just pop up when you least expect it. Mm-hmm. And when you expect them to not answer or not help, they do. Mm-hmm. Zero self-interest on their part. They're just kind of there. And it's important that we pay attention and notice, and obviously are grateful for it. I've had those things in my life too, and I try to encourage young people, and my daughter in particular, to pay attention. There's no harm in asking, and it definitely had a role in changing your trajectory. So jumping around a little bit, and I want to circle back in later on to talk about kind of the lessons that your personal family background have, as well as work in the private sector, have informed and brought into your professional work. But I want to get into the topic of innovation. I've watched you teach. I've watched you present. I know that you have a strong social media presence and have presented at conferences and have done work with Google. Could you tell our listeners about some of that work and where you see the role of innovation in a profession that, by and large, has not changed in appreciable ways for the last 120 some odd years in America?
Yeah, the thing that fuels my work in innovation, I think, is really my passion for equity and creating opportunities for our students. I was fortunate to come from schools in Southeast San Diego that were provided money to give access to technology to kids in my neighborhood. Little did we know that access to that technology or those innovative practices would open up doors for us later in life. So it's kind of my background is I benefited from that. And going back to your point, schools have been taught the same way for, like you said, over 100 years. And, I'm sure many people know the history of why schools are taught the way they do and why they're siloed, and that it was designed to create factory workers and things like that. But what we see is a massive disparity between kids who have access to enrichment opportunities or specialized schools that don't necessarily teach in these antiquated ways. And if our students are not getting access to innovative ideas or concepts or materials, they are going to be behind people who are competing for the same jobs later on. And this kind of comes back to what you were alluding to earlier about my work in the private sector. So working in the private sector, you're kind of able to see what school teaches you and what you get paid for. And you're kind of able to prioritize certain things. And so certain skill sets, like being agile, having soft skills, being able to ideate or problem solve, all of these things become extremely valuable, not only in school, but outside of school especially. And the work that I do, the innovation work, like, to be honest with you, like some of it, sometimes it can be, it's great and I love it because my personality loves just trying new things and taking risks and experimenting. But the most innovation that I feel like I have is kind of in my classroom, because there's a massive system that sometimes stifles the innovation that you want to do, because it's a giant moving ship. Like education is a huge system, and there's so many different components in it. And I do the work at the work in consulting, and I do the speaking, and I do all these kinds of things because those things make me a better teacher, and it also surrounds me with people who are also innovators. And I'm of the philosophy, I think Tony Robbins said this, and I don't really subscribe to like Tony Robbins or any of his stuff, but I remember one thing, some snippet he said on back in the day. He said, if you want to be a millionaire, hang out with billionaires. And there was like an analogy like Michael Jordan. If you want to be a better basketball player, hang out with people that are just really getting after it. So I took that same mentality on when I became a teacher, and I was like, I want to really do things and have ideas and provide resources to my students that are really outside the box and things that they wouldn't normally be exposed to in a normal education setting. I need to be where those people are. So all those different opportunities allow me to be around people and get new ideas, and it sharpens me so I can come back in the classroom and do it with my students. But really what I think it does is the innovations, whether it's technology, whether it's strategies, all of those things, my hope is if I use them, it'll help me reach or bridge the gap that some of my students have between what they feel currently and their success. The challenge is like, I never feel like I'm able to do it with everybody.
If we acknowledge the fact that, and I will call it a fact, that the practices in education are pretty hidebound, they're pretty calcified and have been for a long, long time, whether it's traditional public schools, whether it's public charter schools, whether it's private schools. Most educators were educated and trained in very, very similar settings, and were themselves educated in K-12 in similar settings. And it's, for the most part, with some outliers, but perpetuating the same. How does someone like you, who's charismatic and has bridged the public-private chasm, how do you operate in a way where you don't become discouraged in your daily work? Because you can reach 25, 30 students at a time. But do you dream of 25 or 3,500 at a time, or 25 or 35,000 at a time? Talk to us about how you handle that in your life.
Yeah.
That's a lot of questions in one right there.
No, but I totally understand what you're saying. It's like the economy of scale. So I don't know if this is not probably going to be popular, but in education, there's a belief that the higher up you go in the hierarchy of traditional systems of administration, the more kids you can impact. And while there's truth to that in a policy and system making way, I've noticed that there seems to be a point of diminishing returns as far as personal impact on students. Just because you're one person, and there's only so many people contacts you can have. I mean,
it's the rule of 150. They have it in anthropology. You really can't have meaningful relationships with more than 150 people.
Exactly. And I got into this because of those relationships with students, not to see how high I can climb. So Mitch Hedberg has this joke, and he says, you're really good at comedy, and they want you to do things related to it, but not directly comedy. Like, it's like asking a chef who spent his whole life trying to become a cook, hey, you're really good at cooking, can you farm? And when I started doing just a few things outside of the classroom, people were like, oh, you should do an admin credential program. You should do this, you should do that. And I said, you need me. Where I belong best, I think, is in the classroom. Because not only because of the skill sets that I bring, but also what I represent for students. I tell my students, I am probably one of the only people of color that you're going to have teaching science, especially of African-American background. Like, that's real. Many of my students will never see that. My students of color that see me, I'm one of the few that they're going to see. In an education, even in California, we have this position where we see our kids, many of our kids who see themselves and people that reflect them are not reflected in the classroom, but they are reflected, but they're in other positions. And that's a systemic thing. And why is it that way? It's because the pipeline that we have of creating future educators is broken. It's been broken for a long time. And going back to whether or not I get discouraged, going back and having a community of people that light my candle, that motivate me, that helps. I don't do this in isolation. I'm surrounded, and I have friends and colleagues that we do this together. And so the burden of it is bearable. But also, to be honest, and maybe I'm sure a lot of teachers feel the same way, but my students at Einstein that I've taught, it's been a decade. It's my 10th year. The feedback that they give when I'm exhausted and tired at the end of the day, and I dream about working at the Gap, because that's my escape job. David, I don't know if you know this, but no. When teaching is really hard.
You like to fold shirts?
That's all I want to do. When teaching is hard, and I'm on my 200th contact. And the thing is, with teaching, I challenge anybody to come up with an idea of a career. What career do you go as deep and as wide daily? I mean, doctors see a handful of patients, but when you're a teacher,
maybe nursing,
right. But even then, it's like you could go in and just kind of do your job. But when your student wants to connect with you, and you form that relationship, every individual relationship is specific to that student. They don't care that you got 150 other people. Yeah. They want, Miss Cross, I want to talk to you about the painting that I painted right now. Can we talk about that? Other student, I want to talk about my weekend. It takes a lot. It takes a lot from you. There is no reason why I'd rather be tired, because you're going to be tired no matter what job you do if you're getting after it. There's no other type of tired I'd rather have than doing the work that I'm doing every day. I'm proud of why I'm exhausted. I'm so exhausted. And I know you roast me for playing pickleball, but when I'm out there,
I wasn't going to out you, but you just,
I'm going to say it right now. We play. It's getting me back in shape, but I'm proud of why I'm tired. You know, it's existentially fulfilling work, and it's hard and it's emotional. Even today at advisory, like we watched this video from an insurance commercial, but Hoffman put it on there for our advisory about empathy. And I'm sitting here like tearing up because there's this guy and he's doing all these serving things for his community for no reason other than the fact that he's loving his community. And now I'm supposed to teach and my eyes are welling up. And old Eric wouldn't feel those feelings, but current Eric allows himself to feel those emotions and that sadness and there's also, my students need to see that too.
Have your parents seen you teach?
No. It's an interesting question. No, they haven't. They haven't seen me teach. Neither my mom or my dad have ever seen me teach, nor have they, Nor have they heard the version of the story that I've told you on this podcast. They haven't heard that entire story.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'll let you decide whether you're going to send them the link to this episode or not.
It's funny you bring that up because it's something I've been wondering about too. Yeah.
On the topic of innovation, and you mentioned your love of technology, and obviously innovation is a broader concept than just the use of technology. But I know that technology plays a central role in your life and in your work, and you and I have talked about various technology-related topics over the years. How do you distinguish between the seductive siren call of technology that is really pretty useless in terms of those skills and attributes that you know that your students need to survive in the world, and then the use of other tools and other approaches that really are going to move the students forward? How does Eric Cross distinguish?
My question that I ask is does it move the needle for students? That's really it. And technology is a tool. All forms of technology are a tool. And my job is being the craftsman and knowing what tool to use. So I serve my students better when I have proficient skills in multiple tools. So if I know how to use a graphic organizer on paper and pen, and that's going to benefit one student, awesome. If a bunch of Google Slides are going to support other students, great. The more tools that I can become proficient in, the better I can diagnose and treat in each individual student's situation. So I know that Lexan font is a great font for supporting students with dyslexia. That I know that because of my interest in technology, and so I pay attention to those things. I have assistive tech resources. But you know what? If I'm in a classroom and technology is a distraction for my students, and you can pick up on this really quickly when you tell them to close their screens 45 degrees and their hands go back to it because they want that dopamine hit of touching the keyboard, I might differentiate a class and go, we're going low tech on this one, but not in reaction to seeing it. I'm making that decision a day before and giving them paper and pencil because that tactile response for them is better. So I think, does it move the needle as far as provide deeper learning, enrichment, accessibility, all of those things, or is it just novelty? And there's a lot of novelty out there. I was at the ISTE conference over the summer, and there's a lot of tech companies and there's a lot of money in education. And I walk through that place like a teacher, but also with a financial background who's very frugal. And I listen to these companies and I see a lot of novelty. I go, this doesn't really, this is cool and it's neat, but this isn't really going to move the needle for my students, but it's flashy and it's shiny. And when I teach teachers, I teach them not to be married to any technology. Google's great. Love Google. Lots of great products. Appreciate that they're doing it for free. But game recognized game. Why are they doing it for free? Well, because if our students grow up on G Suite Enterprise, when they go off into the private sector, they're more likely to adopt that than Microsoft 365. So you're going to use what's familiar to you. And I respect that. Look, everybody has to make money, but like, let's not act like this is like, altruism. Like we appreciate the exchange for education. Even for me as an educator, if I'm out teaching students and other teachers how to use it, those are more people that are going to buy Chromebook licenses for your district.
Sure.
So as long as it's transparent, like we're good. But the moment Apple or Microsoft comes out with a better product that's more supportive of my students, for instance, Microsoft has in PowerPoint built in, which we all have access to as teachers here at Einstein for free, they have live translation. So I can speak in English and it'll translate on my slides. Not only that, but if I'm doing like a Zoom and I'm doing my PowerPoint presentation, the listeners can scan my QR code and put it in their mother tongue. So I can now speak 50 languages to different people. Yeah. That's been out for years.
Yeah.
No one else had that except for them.
Yeah.
So you know what? Might love Google, might be an innovator, but I'm using Microsoft PowerPoint for this whole conversation with staff. And so I guess the simple point is like, does it move the needle?
Yeah.
And is it the right tool for the job?
I'm listening to Elon Musk's biography that just came out. Walter Isaacson. It's pretty amazing. And one of the things that Elon Musk has done in his factories is to shift from being completely married to the idea of robotic assembly lines to seeing where he can reinsert humans who can do a better, faster, more accurate job. And so there's this funny, scene where the robot's doing things really quickly, but it's doing things the wrong way.
Right. And
because it's just programmed to do a certain thing. And he's like, what's doing that? And they go, we just flip the switch and then we sit and watch. And as long as the robots are working, it's okay. And he goes, you guys, you have to pay attention. So then he goes back in, he starts removing robots and throwing them in the trash. He's a very dramatic guy, but throwing them in the trash and inserting humans back in at certain points along the line. That's what I think we risk being seduced by. Perhaps it's somewhat intellectual laziness to fall into 1-to-1 ratios, for example. 1-to-1, okay, I guess we think, okay, every kid's got a piece of technology that they can use, but is it really making a difference? What would happen if the internet's out for a day? I reflect on that. I've been around this game long enough I remember the first 10 years of my life, there was no internet in classrooms. Right now, if the internet goes down, we've got 150 teachers and staff saying we can't work today. It's not just Einstein, it's just our society, right? Mm-hmm. And so I sometimes fantasize about just quietly flipping the switch and seeing what happens as kind of a reminder and a reset where we come from. Your grandma, who I imagine she ran a pretty strict household, that she had that level of success with her family. But, that was old school person-to-person teaching. And she didn't learn in a high-tech environment. Mm-hmm. And so I think about that a lot, right? Is like how much of technology, this is more of a rhetorical musing on my part, but how much of technology is useful as you say, move the needle, and how much is removing us from each other as humans in real ways?
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying. I think like that ability to be agile and resilient in those challenges, i.e. like losing the internet or electricity, right? And then what do you do? And even though those are kind of more thought experiments, they are important. It does speak to a bigger thing about that agility and being able to problem solve, and which translates to a skill that we need to teach. We want to teach our students. When this happens, what if? Can you think through it, or can you adjust or pivot a different direction? And that's a really valuable skill. And as a teacher, I want to teach my students how to do that. When my students go, the Wi-Fi isn't working on the Chromebook. Now, when they say that, if their Wi-Fi wasn't working on their Nintendo Switch, you better believe they're going to turn to MacGyver and figure out some way. Right. They're taking foil from gum wrappers and trying to intercept signals from the CIA. They're all of a sudden, because they're motivated. So when they have real world problems, they're able to solve those things. Yeah. And so how can I create that as best as I can in the classroom? But yeah, I think as a teacher, I want to lean into that and make sure that the tool that I'm using is the best for the job. And it's also important not to just have an abundance of tools. You put a chisel and a hammer in my hand and a marble block, and I can make noise and I can chip away at it, but you put it in Michelangelo's hands and you have David. You have a beautiful sculpture. So the skill is important too. And this is why schools, in addition to having like one-to-one, how do we teach them to be craftsmen of all of these tools? Or do they know the Google Chromebook, everything front and back? Do they know G Suite? Do they know how to, are their pedagogy tight? Like, do they know how to create lesson plans that are engaging, interactive, weave all these things in, differentiate? And sometimes it's easy to make assumptions on that, but the reality is you can have a quality control issue where you see different people have different skill sets in it. And so it's, in addition to having the tools, you also need the training and the skills to be built so that they can complement each other.
ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Under the general umbrella of artificial intelligence, AI. For the somewhat lay person, it appears to have just appeared out of nowhere. If you peel the onion a bit, it's been percolating for a long time, and we've been using it in less obvious ways anytime we got on Alexa and Siri and self-driving cars and those things, even before ChatGPT came out, and Bard and the other tools. Where do you see artificial intelligence being most productive in education going forward?
I think, and I'll speak specifically of generative AI, which is, I think, what you're speaking to.
Yeah, like the language LLMs, model, right? Yeah.
Yep, language learning models. And this is what people have seen since really February. I think it has the power to personalize learning for students and really close the gap between and solve some of the problems that we've been seeing and we've been experiencing, that we've been relying a lot on humans to do, which has created a lot of work, but not necessarily work that translates as quickly into actually helping the student. And I'll give an example. So imagine that we have a AI that has all of the data about a student. We're still like, are we still faxing information? I feel like we're still faxing information.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
I feel like we were waiting on a file one time and someone was faxing it.
That's a whole different topic.
Okay.
But yes, but we are, and it's amazing that in California, school districts mainly communicate with each other about student cumulative files over fax.
Yeah, that amazed me. I was surprised it didn't come over on a pony in just someone's satchel. But imagine, like, from kindergarten, even preschool TK, that all of the data that we have was housed. And I think actually this conversation came back from you, where we talked about blockchain a long time ago. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Like, imagine that's how it was. And the school district had this learning model that not only understood where the student was coming from, but also if they had an IEP, if they had a 504, if they had any other data that can contribute to their education, we had that housed somewhere, and it learned the student. Now, as the student got older, it would learn the student better and better. It also had background information about, any health concerns, social, emotional, all of those things. And the student sits down on their computer. And the computer opens up and they log in and it says, "Hi, Eric. How are you doing today?" Do a quick social emotional check. "Hey, I'm feeling this today. I'm in the blue zone. I'm in the green zone. I'm feeling a 7. Hey, totally understand. Is there anybody that you want to connect with today you'd like to check in with?" Okay, checks in. "No, I'm good." "Okay. Today, here's your learning goal. Some teacher objectives. We're going to work on phonemes or whatever it is. Which one of these topics is most interesting to you? We're talk about like marine science. Do you want to talk about poetry?" And it contextualizes the learning for that student, but it also knows the Lexile levels, MAP scores, SBAC, like all that data is there. This is stuff that we do analog right now as teachers. And we do it because we have to, but it doesn't necessarily add anything when I do it. If I was able to automate that, then that would create more time for me to actually do the thing that the student needs me to do, which is actually be there with them and do the things in addition to the teaching, which is actually that human part of the connection. So as that curriculum is customized for Eric, the student right next to them might be at a higher or lower level and it's customized for them. Now we're talking about personalized learning. We're talking about customized curriculum. Now, does it raise other questions? Sure, totally. Is a student just sitting in front of a Chromebook the whole time with headphones on? Do we actually need a certified teacher? Can we just have an adult walking around and students are just sitting there? It's almost like these dystopian retro future kids with like helmets on and they're sitting in front of a computer and they're just doing that. No, I think that if anything, we need to innovate and redesign what's possible by using what is. And I think in the next 5 years, I feel like, at least based on what I'm seeing, we're going to see more and more of this. And I've already been playing with it by taking some of this data that exists and removing personal information and uploading it into a language learning model and having it customize things like assessments, lesson plans. And I would like to get to a point where I can create a bot that a student can interact with and it can be personalized for them. And this isn't stuff of science fiction. This is like real stuff. I mean, they're already using it now for grading essays and things like this. So in the short term, I think that's where we're going to go in the next 5 years. I think we're going to see much more personalized learning. I think I'm seeing the big companies already trying to bring in this. Khan Academy is probably the leader right now.
Yeah, I was going to say they have a tutor.
They do.
That's
Khanmigo.
Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, Khanmigo, and it's basically powered by ChatGPT, but with guardrails. So you can't ask it, what's the answer? It acts like a tutor because of the prompts. They're the leader right now in it, but a lot of the big companies are going to probably go that way too. And then I think it just becomes like the game Civilization. I don't know if you ever played that game back in the day, Sid Meier's Civilization, but essentially you build a civilization from prehistoric man all the way up to the future civilization, but you can't unlock new innovations unless you've opened up like other ones. For example, you can't build the Colosseum unless you've learned masonry and like farming. You need those two innovations and technologies to be able to go to the next one. So my wondering is, with ChatGPT and AI and language learning models, what is that going to unlock for us? And what are the future jobs that are out there that I can prepare my students for? Because we're already seeing high-level positions use ChatGPT. How long do we wait before we start teaching our students how to use it as a tool?
And will educators embrace it? Or will there be naysayers who, just like the truck drivers who, when they interview them and ask them if technology can replace them, they say, no, my job's way too nuanced. It's way too difficult. You know how long it took me to learn to drive an 18-wheeler, and I got to learn how to shift, and the average person can barely drive their own car, and they go on and on and on. And then fast forward a few years, and we're going to have fleets going across America where the only time they need to stop is to refuel. And they'll draft off each other, and there might be, instead of one driver in each truck, there might be one person in a remote office just monitoring video in the different cabs. Is that a risk in education, that educators just go, I either refuse to do this? I always think about the boots on the ground teacher. Mm-hmm. No, when you look at what happened with COVID, mm-hmm. where in a matter of just a few days we had to go remote, and there was really no other option. Mm-hmm. And some folks had almost no issue at all
Right.
doing that. And other folks, I don't think are ever going to recover.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to be the impact, do you think, in a very change averse profession in general?
Well, I think COVID is a great example of it. I think we're going to see attrition. We're going to see, and I think the answer is yes to all of those scenarios you gave. You're going to have, you already do. You have the early adopters, the people who embrace it, that realize it. They're lawyers, doctors, politicians, whoever. Every position is, people are using it and they're seeing the value of it. You have educators that are using it, and then you're going to have people who are naysayers. And also to that, I think it's also important, you have people who are asking critical questions. And I think it's important that we proceed also with cautious skepticism. For instance, this is the Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park. This is the character that Jeff Goldblum plays. In the first Jurassic Park, he says, "You spent so much time asking if you could, you didn't stop to think if you should." And when we first saw these things like ChatGPT coming out, there were massive biases in it. Images, suggestions, all these other things. And there were people calling the alarm on it. That has the potential to impact people. We need to be asking questions and having cautious skepticism moving forward. But you're also going to have people who, say like, look, I want to teach my own way, because human beings, we like biologically, we want to be in a position of rest. And so we don't want to do extra stuff. This isn't a judgment. This is just an observation from a biology teacher. We don't like exerting extra effort. We've evolved that way.
Yeah.
And so if I have to go and I'm in the tail end of my career and I've never been innovative and I've found success in the way that I've been doing things, they might be more likely to say like, look, this isn't the thing I want to do. But those folks are in everything. You have cell phones. There are people who didn't want to adopt cell phones, cars, people on horses. And I don't know if we have any data on this, but I imagine when we developed agriculture and we stopped becoming hunter-gatherers, people are like, well, you're not walking enough. You got to get out and get your steps in, back in the day.
There's an article, I was interviewing a college professor about, actually I asked him the same question about AI and just the role of language learning models going forward. And he said, I was just reading an article from the 1930s or 40s about it was actually probably previous to that, about the dangers of the chalkboard in classrooms. And I don't even know what was used before that. Actually, it may be all the way into the 1800s. But my point is the same, right? Is that a new technology comes just as when the motor car was started to be a thing, and people said, why would you ever want to have these loud, clattering, polluting things when you could just have a calm ride on a horse? And by the way, you're going to put all the horseshoe, the farriers, and the horse poop picker-uppers out of business.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so you see where that ended up, 120 years later.
Yeah. I mean, Plato said the same thing about the written word. When people started writing down things, as opposed to it being an oral culture, they thought everybody would forget everything. But right now in 2023 and for years, the written word has been the most venerated thing. And I think one of the biggest threats right now with ChatGPT and AI that's happening, especially in higher ed, is that when we level the playing field with the written word, and you can use a language learning model to express yourself and your views and your ideas in a way that only high-level academics could, that actually makes this form of communication and I want to say lowers its prestige, because you can essentially simulate it. And what does that increase? And so like the fringe folks, and I kind of lean into this a little bit, what is the new written form? And the discussions are like, it's oral communication, the soft skills, being able to articulate yourself and share your idea and bring it back into the classroom. It's different if so let's say I give an essay and I want a student to write an essay about, I don't know, the fall of Rome, since I'm using Plato, Roman, Greek, I don't remember. I teach science. I can't remember. You can simulate that or ask ChatGPT to write it.
All right.
But if I present on it, it's hard to fake that.
Yeah.
Even if I had ChatGPT write it and write my presentation, I still have to deliver that, and I have to deliver it with authenticity.
Right. And the first question that comes from your audience, that'll be the truth serum.
Exactly. Especially if it's a question where you had to synthesize the information, or it's not a factual question. That is kind of the big thing is can you do this? Can you communicate your information? I think this is where a lot of schools are probably going to go with some of their assessments is doing like oral assessments and things like this. But the future, as you were saying, you had all those terms for like horses. I can't remember what they were, but all those jobs that went out of business. I tend to agree with some of the writers now that say the future jobs are going to be people who use AI, not AI versus humans, but humans who use AI versus humans who don't. And that's where I think things are going. People who are using it, again, as another tool.
Yeah.
It's another tool in my tool belt.
Maybe eventually more than 2 people will read my dissertation, because that was the whole topic of my dissertation was the use of leadership storytelling among school administrators and the connection between that and successful outcomes as leaders. It's interesting, right? The oldest form of communication, we may now be circling back to that being central to our lives again.
Yeah. And it kind of makes sense, right? When you look at what are the most popular ways that people consume content, it's video.
Yeah.
It's TikTok, it's Instagram, it's YouTube. We're watching content creators.
Yeah.
So it's kind of all coming it's all coming full circle. So it's just an interesting time to live in and see this happening. But again, as with my mindset, I look at it and go, how do I help my students be ready now and expose them now? Not 12 and 13 years old. It's just exposure and experience. I want them to say, I've seen that before. I've seen VR before. I've seen AI before. I've seen coding before. Now, some of them are going to run with it and do awesome stuff, but others of them, I might be their first exposure. And then 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, that wonder grows, and maybe they get into a school program or something where they have more access. It's not the first time they've seen it. It's maybe one step closer to being comfortable with it. I'm going to go experiment with this. Yeah. And sometimes that's all it takes.
You've been very generous with your time, and I wanted to thank you. I just have a couple quick questions remaining. And I will, by the way, for the listeners, I will be putting your contact information, your social media presence, and other information in the show notes for this episode. Things we kind of nibbled around the edges of today, but didn't dive into in detail. What's on your anti-resume? So by anti-resume, I mean, I get it. Everybody makes a resume, and Microsoft Word and now ChatGPT will tell you how to format it the right way. And we celebrate all the things we've done, chronologically and location-wise and all these other things. What's on your anti-resume? In other words, what are the gaps that you would like to fill in your life before you're done with this marathon?
So this would be things that I haven't done. This is a great question. Things that I haven't done.
I got it from ChatGPT.
Did you really?
No.
I was going to say, this is a good one.
No.
I need to jump back on. You must be
I got it from a TED Talk.
Oh, did you? You must be on that 4.0, the paid version. So these are things like bucket list type things?
It's, it could be bucket list things. It could, typically bucket list things seem to be enjoyment related, right? Like I'm going to jump out. I'm going to do wing walk. I'm going to wing walk on a World War II era plane. That could be it. But I'm also thinking about things you still want to learn, things you want to be exposed to in your life. What would you put on a resume? No one ever asks you, where do you want to grow? Mm-hmm. When you're applying for a job or you're out there in the world. It's always, I've done this and I sat on this committee and well, okay, those are already bubbles behind the boat. So where's the boat headed?
This is a good question. Everything I come up with are things like experiences, but they don't feel worthy of the question, because I want to have something that's much more like raw and transparent. Gosh,
it doesn't need to go deeper than it needs to go.
Oh, I feel but it's such a good question. This is such a good question. What is something that I still want to do, or something that I feel like I'm wondering that myself. I feel like I'm at a good place with balance right now, but I wonder what's around the next corner. I kind of feel like with the things that I'm doing, it's opening up more opportunities to do different things. but there's a call in me to want to make sure that I'm, I guess, being faithful to what I've been given, like, or the opportunities that I have. Like, am I doing the most with what I have? And I don't know what that next part of the journey is. I had a mentor one time who asked me about a similar question, and they made an analogy of a ship in the fog that's sailing its course, but it's foggy and they don't know what the next destination is. And so I feel like that now. There are things that I kind of dabble in, like I think about, roles of the career, like different, like doing different roles or book. But sometimes that's like, is this what I'm supposed to do? Is that supposed to be the next thing? My entire life, I've been a first generation in everything I've done. High school, both college degrees, home ownership, the independence that I've been able to have and the comfort that I've been able to have. There hasn't been a consistent, like, this is the next step. And so I've kind of manifested it as I've gone. Yeah, I don't know what's left. What I think about is I hope that what I spend my day doing and when I die, whenever that is, or when I'm done, that my life will have mattered. And not mattered to the people that it was supposed to matter to, like my family. But the world was better because I was in it. And I hope that's the case for the young people that I work with. And that might be a lot to hope, but I think that drives me. And everything that I do outside of my work in the classroom, I only say yes to it if it improves who I am in the classroom. And so whether it's teaching at USD or whether it's consulting or the podcast or all these other things, all of those things make me a better science teacher or a teacher for my students. And that's my biggest criteria. And so as long as I'm getting better in the classroom, and I think the great thing about it is, like, no day is ever the same. So it never gets boring. So I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at. I do play with an option. I do play with a buyout clause, though, to go back into the private sector. I don't think I've ever talked to you about this.
No.
Yeah. So I always have this buyout clause of like $250,000, like of what I would need to have yearly to maintain a quality of life and then have so much discretionary income that I can go and apply all of those things about innovation and like blue sky, moonshot stuff and start something. School, program, project, like actually be a change maker because I had the resources that I needed to be able to do it and I could do it independently.
So when you get to $250,000 of annual income?
Yeah. I don't know where that number came from, but
depends what state you live in.
This is true. California's a little expensive. People move to places.
Make it about $450 in California.
It is. And like, I'd love to like wax poetic and say like, oh, it's like the job, but like, no, look, if I was able to go into the private sector and generate enough income and wealth, that would allow me to be, again, like a change maker. It's a lot of work to go and request funding. It's a lot of work to go online and ask for donations. It's a lot of work to, ask for grants and all these other things. Like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
If I could just write that check and say, hey, we're going to go and do this. Hey, we're going to start this school. And because I have my dream school, David, that also includes a community that's built around it. That does top to bottom, that addresses a lot of systemic things.
We're going to need to do interview 2.0.
I know.
Because that piqued my interest. Last question.
Yeah.
You get the chance to create a billboard on the 5 freeway that condenses and synthesizes and encapsulates your view of the world, your work, your role in it, any of those things. That should send a message that drivers will remember as they're driving by, and they only have 2 or 3 seconds to read it. What does Eric Cross's billboard say?
It says what's on my socks. It says, be a good person.
BAGP, be a good person.
Be a good person. There's a company out of Denver that is called Be a Good Person, and all they do is put that on their clothes. And about 5 years ago, I realized that I was a walking billboard for 600 students. They looked at what I wore So, sorry, listeners, you can't see my Shrek Crocs today that I'm wearing. David was kind enough not to bring it up, but I will. So I could wear Nike shirts, or I could have a message. And the message of be a good person is kind of open to interpretation. But since you say the freeway, definitely on the freeway.
That's perfect for the freeway, right?
And I think at the core of who we are, C.S. Lewis wrote about this. He said that, all people in all places, they have a sense of virtue. We might disagree as far as how that manifests itself in like religion and cultures, but there are virtues that we all have, universal virtues like bravery or community, things like this. Like there's this kind of universal ones. And I think inside of us, in many humans, most humans, I think, a message that's general, speaks to some core goodness inside of us. And how they manifest that is up to the person. But if I'm driving down the 94 in traffic and I see be a good person, I might sneer and snark at it, but that'll be in my brain kind of rattling around. And I might make a little extra effort to try to maybe let somebody in the lane or, be kind to somebody. So I think I'll just keep it simple.
I appreciate that. And maybe we have a future podcast sponsor, #BAGP.
Yeah.
So folks in Denver, if you're listening. But in all seriousness, thank you so much, Eric, for your time today, your generosity of thought and narrative, your candor, and we definitely will have to do this again.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me here. It's been an honor.
Thank you for listening to the Superintendent's Hangout. You can follow me on Twitter at DVS1970. Please be sure to share this show with friends and family on social media and in the real world. Thank you to Brad Bacayal for editing and production assistance, and to Tina Royster for scheduling and logistics. Thanks for hanging out, and have a great day.